care for is to know how the epidermis actually adapts its shape and its structure, basically. And that's the key question that we're having, and what we're actually asking is how are regulators of cell structure, cell shape that then turns into tissue shape, how does that actually integrate with other pathways that actually control proliferation, but also metabolic activity, which are of course tightly linked, as well as upon challenge of the barrier, of the epidermal barrier, to see how that integrates with basically with those regulators of cytoarchitecture. And our overarching hypothesis is actually that one of the first things when you have a wound is actually that you, or small attack to the barrier, is that the structure will change. So somehow it needs to coordinate restoring this structure with making sure you're not getting disease, obvious disease, basically, in a nutshell. So one of the things that we're very excited about is actually that for the longest time we were basically in the dark how ECAD here, which is a cell-cell adhesion molecule, would regulate the tight junctional barrier, which is up in the upper layers of the epidermis. And I think in the last 2 or 3 years we really have sort of found some light into the darkness, at least I think so. In which because the question there is, why do you only get these junctions in this upper layer and why do they not form in lower layers, basically? And I think by understanding a little bit more how mechanics play out within this tissue and across this tissue, we've started to understand how this junction can only form there. And this seems to be coupled to the EGF receptor, which people know very well for a long, long time and is very important for the epidermis. But it was a bit unexpected to find that this receptor is not only in the lower layers and plays a role in proliferation and in innate immune regulation, but actually seems to be active in regulating these structural junctions and actually the barrier function, and is actually localized at the barrier, basically. And for me, what I find exciting about that is that there's been this tremendous in cancer patients that have EGF receptor inhibitors, they actually do get a lot of skin problems. And I think this localization, where we found it now, may actually really play into why, when you inhibit this receptor, why you may actually get barrier functions of a barrier disruption. And so basically one of the things is that we think that this really integrates its innate immune function together with the structural barrier function. So what is the importance of the EGF receptor at this tight junctional barrier? That would be my key question. So we're using a knockout approach in mice where we simply only knock out the EGF receptor in this upper layer. And the risk of that approach is only that these cells turn over, and we're not sure if we can inactivate it soon enough before these cells are on their way out to form the stratum corneum. But that's what we're going to try and see if that works, and hopefully we can then address that question. So in the past, I think my PhD advisor had a big influence on me. His name is Arnoud Sonnenberg, and he really was a tremendous teacher in terms of science, in terms of critical thinking, in terms of being critical towards yourself as well. And through his endeavors in integrins, we actually came to the skin. And I think that I have to grant Marcel Jonkman a lot of credit for that, because that interaction really showed me the beauty of how you can combine of interacting, that MD scientists and PhD scientists should interact, because we can teach each other an awful lot, I think. And this interaction is actually more than just the sum of the two, I believe. And so that's been a great influence on me. Then there's been several people across for different reasons that just have been inspiring, I think. So so Caroline Dembski was inspiring for a very different reason, because I remember that when I met her, she had kids, and I thought, oh, it is actually doable. And this was just on a one chance encounter, but I really remember that very vividly. And that I think is very important for women especially, that they see you can combine things and it's possible to do more than one thing. And it's not just either or, but it can actually be both. And so there's been people there that have been inspiring. And then I think also one person that had an influence on me is Thomas Creek, because he really gave me the opportunity to do my independent research and promote my career in the German system that was at that time still developing how do you do the independent young researcher track. Now it's much more established, but at the time it was a little less established. And he gave me all the opportunities to do that. I think you have to use your strengths, and what I mean with that is that you have to see what you're good at and go to labs where you can use those strengths. And I think so, go to the best lab that is the best for you. And so people think you have to go to top-notch labs, and I do agree you should go to the best labs that you can, but you also have to look very carefully, is this a lab where I can thrive? Because if you don't like very competition within the lab, but like a cooperative environment, then that's the lab you should choose, and not one that thrives where people just basically are sort of intercompetitive to really thrive them. And I think this is what people really have to look at, for one thing. Within dermatological research, I think there's a lot of opportunities. I think you have to always look for, and I mean this in the most, look for mentors, look for people that can support you. And then from that support, often other things materialize. That can be within, but it can also be somewhere else. And so I think that is very helpful to build your network, not to just build it for your career, but if you do it in a very genuine way, it actually always gives back, I find. So it's very important. So the ESDR is actually, I think, is really the integration of medical science with basic science in dermatological research. And I think that is exactly the beauty of it. As a PhD, I learn here about diseases where I think the models that we have, they make me think differently. So that's one aspect where I really get the latest in dermatological research from the clinical side as well as from the basic research side. So that integration is very important. What I get from the ESDR is a tremendous network, and I think it has given me, I've got to learn people, to know people because of this, and I've developed lifelong friendships through the ESDR. So I think that's really an extra value that you don't look for, but that still is I think one of the beauties of doing science, is that you get this international network with ultimately friends all over the world. And I think that that's very important, because it also helps you then in your research through talking to them, they get other ideas. You should talk to this person because it may help your question and address that in a better way. It's still not knowing. So still having this puzzle in front of me and really trying to figure out how it works, basically. I find that fascinating. It's what drove me ultimately. It was not a joke. The genetics professor that really gave this story and did it in one way, and then he at a certain point, and we were all scribbling because we all thought it was very important. And then he said, so this sounds good, huh? And it's not true. We don't know this. It can also go like this, and they took the story the exact opposite and made it all very logical and fluent again. So I think this is exactly what fascinates me, that we have all of these still many open questions, many big questions that we don't understand and that we have to understand, and ultimately that can then also help treating patients. But I'm still fascinated by the basics. My biggest success, I think, I find that a very hard question. I think we have contributed to perhaps thinking a little bit differently about barrier formation and how this tissue is actually organized in some ways. My biggest disappointment is, I find that even perhaps even more, I don't have too many of those actually. I think sometimes I should probably respond faster than I do, and that sometimes, but that's not really a biggest regret. So I'm trying to really think of a biggest regret. Maybe, I mean, no, I find it hard, sorry.